In the early months of 2026, you couldn't turn on a television without hearing politicians declare the U.S. economy a runaway success. It is easy to see why they get that confidence, because official forecasts back them up. Goldman Sachs projected a robust 2.8% real GDP growth for the year, painting a picture of a historic economic boom. But if you look past the podiums and check in on the average American, you get a completely different story. Consumer sentiment surveys show the public is deeply pessimistic about their financial reality, creating a strange disconnect between macroeconomic headlines and everyday life. To understand why, we have to look at the K-shaped divergence taking place underneath the top-line numbers. This chart shows a stark decoupling between resilient hard economic data in light blue and plummeting soft data, or consumer sentiment, in dark blue. The growing gap comes down to measurement. In surveys, every citizen gets one equal vote. But in hard economic data, purchasing power dictates the numbers. That means the top 10% of households, who have the most money to spend, heavily skew the averages upwards. If we want to understand the true state of the 2026 American economy, we have to ignore the political headlines and start auditing the fine print hidden inside the data. Let's start with the labor market. On paper, things look highly resilient. The aggregate unemployment rate has been hovering around a historically low 4.4%, and overall payrolls are steadily growing. However, if we look at actual customer deposit data from Bank of America, we can see exactly what is happening to real take-home pay. Data reveals massive wage inequality. Upper-income earners see wages grow by 4.2%, while lower and middle-income wage growth has collapsed to around 1%. Even the traditional raise of changing jobs has dropped to 6.7%, far below double-digit gains seen during the Great Resignation. This cooling job market is hitting younger demographics especially hard. This chart shows the unemployment rate for different age groups, and you can see a sharp 1.2 percentage point rise in the yellow line, representing 20 to 24-year-olds. Faced with uncertainty over new tariff policies and the ongoing integration of artificial intelligence, many corporations have enacted hiring freezes that disproportionately lock entry-level workers completely out of the market. A low aggregate unemployment headline doesn't mean much if the available jobs offer stagnant wages and entirely exclude the newest generation of workers. The White House has also heavily promoted the idea that inflation has been tamed, pointing to resilient consumer spending as proof that Americans are feeling confident. But the fine print on inflation tells a more complicated story. Core inflation is still running uncomfortably high at roughly 3.4%. That sticky inflation keeps the Federal Reserve firmly backed into a corner when it comes to cutting interest rates. That highly touted consumer spending is also heavily skewed. The top 10% of households drive the vast majority of all consumer purchases nationwide. Meanwhile, the bottom 90% of consumers are largely tapped out. They are squeezed by compounding cost of living pressures that top-level inflation drops fail to capture. Concentrated wealth at the top currently masks widespread financial fatigue, allowing a boom for the few to disguise a struggling middle class. This brings us to the headline GDP growth of 2.8%. On paper, the U.S. is successfully dodging a technical recession, but that growth is being artificially propped up by massive federal government deficit spending, which is running near all-time highs at roughly 6% of GDP. The second driver inflating these numbers is the billions pouring into AI data centers, now accounting for a massive chunk of U.S. structural investment. While this massive tech investment boosts the GDP calculations, it hasn't yet translated into measurable output for workers. This chart shows the sharp divergence between the recent spike in information processing investment and the lagging real output per hour. A GDP growth rate driven by government debt and concentrated tech infrastructure puts a firm floor under the economy, but it fails to elevate the average citizen's standard of living. Economists have started using a specific term to describe this contradictory environment: stagflation light. Stagflation light is a scenario where GDP growth limps along just below its typical trendline, while inflation remains stubbornly and uncomfortably high. We can ground this abstract macroeconomic theory in the ultimate tangible metric of the American dream, the housing market. Despite this supposed economic boom, true homeownership is drastically lower than the official headlines suggest. Today, only 22%